This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where my very special guest today is Bart Sibrel, who is a student of the alleged lunar landings. He's produced a fascinating film entitled A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. He is from Nashville, a Tennessee-based filmmaker, an investigative journalist, a critic of the U.S. space program, and proponent of the theory that the 6 Apollo lunar landing missions between 1969 and 1972 were hoaxes perpetrated by the American government. Bart, it's a real pleasure to have you as my guest on The Real Deal.
Wow, gee, what a great name, The Real Deal. We'll try to get to it.
Well, presumably that's what you've been after, so this seems to fit.
I hope so.
Tell me to begin with, how'd you get interested in this topic?
Well, you know, I hate from my biblical point of view here, but as much of a sinner as I am, I try to do what's right with all my ability, sometimes failing. The New Testament, you know, was written largely in part by Paul. And Paul went from killing Christians to being their leader. And I went from being the biggest fan of the moon mission to being the biggest critic. I started out, my dad was in the Air Force. I grew up around aircraft and space museums, and had on my bedroom wall probably 20 pictures, 9 by 12 color prints of Apollo 11 that I saw every day, 365 days a year, from about the age of 8 to 14. So 365 days a year for 6 years, every day, multiple times a day, I saw 20 pictures of the first moon mission. And I was the biggest fan, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, I would like to say that, you know, when the killer of Christians becomes their leader, and when the biggest fan of the moon missions becomes the biggest critic, that in and of itself should say something.
You underwent a conversion experience.
Correct.
So we're on the road to Cape Canaveral.
Exactly. A bright light shined around me.
Yeah. What first tipped you off, Bart, that something was wrong?
Well, when I was 14, I was watching this television program, and there was a gentleman on it who worked for NASA for about, I guess, 6.5, 7 years during the time of the Apollo rocket. And he was a technical manual editor. So the thing was so departmentalized. He had so many contractors, 12 or more around the country, working on various parts of the mission. So really no one saw the whole picture except a handful of people at the top. And this person, because he edited for grammar all of the manuals and the memos. So he actually saw in his mind the overview of the entire project only much like the administrator of NASA himself. And he got a hold of one memo that said the odds of reaching the moon on the first attempt without killing anybody was about 1 in 10,000. And people have to realize that in the 1960s, at that point in history of aviation, probably, a couple of million aircraft had been built since, the 1900s. World War II and all that, hundreds of thousands of aircraft and commercial aircraft. So a couple of million aircraft, probably more, had been built at that point in history in the 1960s. And their latest aircraft during the same time Apollo was being developed was the 747. Now, the 747 only went about 7 miles up into the air. And it took a year longer to develop than a rocket going to another planet for the very first time. So you had 2 million aircraft being built, and the latest and greatest to develop the 2 millionth and one took a year longer than building a rocket to go to another world for the first time that worked flawlessly. And so when I saw him on television as a 14-year-old, fortunately, it caught me as an open-minded individual, And I went back to my bedroom wall, looked at some of the pictures, and sure enough, it was as if my eyes were wide shut all of this time looking at them. I saw them, but I really didn't see. You can even say the Bible says people who have ears, but they don't hear, People who have eyes, they do not see. People who have minds, they do not perceive. And so I started looking at the pictures again and looking at them with new eyes, and sure enough, it looked like there was a certain point in the photographs in which the foreground kind of became fuzzy and out of focus, and even a different color straight across left to right, indicating a fake background. That's what I saw as a 14-year-old. Then about 10 years went by, I became a professional filmmaker, and of course my job as a professional filmmaker is to make fake scenes look real, right? And oddly enough, serendipitously enough, I was editing some videos for the gentleman who had produced the TV show I had seen 10 years earlier about the moon landing being fake. And I'm like, well, who was that guy on your show who worked for NASA? He put me in touch with him, and I called him up, and even at the time, I thought, you know, if we didn't go to the moon, how do I know this is the real guy? Maybe the real guy was killed, and this is some guy pretending to be him to spill anybody who comes to him, you know, with any juicy, you know, leaks. But I called him up, and after about 1 minute, he was so personable, I thought, no, this is the real guy. Even called him from a payphone across the street, just in case. And, well, he suggested that I do a film about the moon landings being fake. So I took about 6 months off, pulled a little bit of salary out of savings and paid myself a salary for 6 months and just did research. I found out that 2 of the 3 astronauts never give interviews. The administrator of NASA resigned days before the first mission. The Soviets had launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3. For every 100 hours we spent in space, they spent 500 hours. They were much more advanced, and they never left Earth orbit. And Nixon was president, and the Vietnam War, and the goal of Kennedy to go to the moon before the end of the decade, which he made not as a scientist, but as a visionary, right? And so I, at that time, estimated that there was probably at least a 1 out of 4 chance that the moon landings were fake. And ever since I was a kid, I liked puzzles. I even draw mazes myself. And I can draw pretty elaborate mazes, poster-sized mazes. I just like puzzles. And it's kind of what this is, you know, whether we went to the moon or not, it's kind of a puzzle. And I also have a character that's kind of relentless. You know, I hard to quit, never say die, always away type of philosophy. Knowing that about myself, that I like puzzles and I'm relentless, and realizing there was a 1 out of 4 chance we didn't go to the moon, this was back probably in about 1991. I originally turned down the project to do a documentary about it because I thought, you know, I'm a liar, everybody's a liar. If they didn't go to the moon and if I start turning over these rocks, it could be dangerous if they didn't go, right? So why should I risk my life for someone else's folly? So I turned down the project. About 5 years went by, and I started reading the Bible. And I realized that everyone's mortal anyway, right? Yeah. And that, you know, the simplicity of the Bible is really eloquent. And Einstein thought the same way, that everything is really very simple. And the Bible says it's a battle between light and darkness, between truth and lies. You know, the first sin that entered the world, you could say the first sin of man was disobedience, some believe pride. But the first sin, period, wasn't of man. It was of the devil, which was a lie. And seeing how mankind would scientifically basically say that putting a man on another planet, another world, the moon, is the greatest technological achievement, I think it would have to be if it were true, right? The fact that that would in and of itself be a lie, or potentially a lie, to me just somehow stirred my spirit and said, you know, there's something about this that doesn't smell right. 2 of the 3 astronauts don't give interviews. The administrator of NASA resigned days before the first mission. And all the shadows that should be parallel, they intersect sunlight, you know. I changed my mind 5 years later and I decided to do the film. Well, about 3.5 years into this 5-year project, you know, it's only a 47-minute film. It's called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. and you can view it on YouTube. And 3.5 years into this project, I mean, I spent 4,000 hours editing the movie.
How many hours?
4,000 hours.
4,000 hours.
So that's 40 hours a week for 2 years. I spent 2 years editing a 47-minute movie. Then research, and then shooting a little bit, and then the narration and all this stuff. And I was doing it under the theory it might be true. Then 3.5 years into the project, we were given some never-before-seen footage as part of the missing tapes, which some of your listeners may have heard of. And, we have unedited footage of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes. See, they only aired 10 seconds of this unedited footage, and had I only seen the best 10 seconds that they showed everybody else, I doubt if I would ever figured it out. It looks really good. It's a special effects shot, as we can go into a little bit later. But basically, they're faking a shot of being halfway to the moon, and not only do we have the 10 seconds that they aired to everybody, we have the hour of them doing the shot over and over again about 30 times, faking a shot right in front of your eyes. Now, the shot has been licensed 5 times by the BBC, NBC, Discovery Channel, and a couple of others. And it's never been broadcast. It's always been canceled days before it's to be broadcast. I even did the Geraldo show 2 weeks ago, and I hand-delivered a DVD to Geraldo in New York, and he asked me on the show, what's the greatest evidence? And he didn't even have it queued up, ready to show. He showed me being hit by one astronaut and kicked in the butt by another astronaut. But he asked for the key evidence, and I gave it to him, and he didn't show it.
He didn't show
it. This footage proves, in my mind, I would bet my life on it, that the moon landings are fake. So now, 3.5 years into this project, that I'm doing under the theory that it was fake, it's not a theory in my mind. I mean, it's a fact. They didn't go. I mean, I spent 5 years making a 47-minute movie. I encourage your listeners to go to, YouTube and watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon in 5 parts, or buy the higher quality DVD from moonmovie.com. You've seen it. There it is. That's my background on the story. Where do we go from here?
Well, let me just say a word or two about about your documentary, which I reviewed again today after having not watched it for several years. But I love the film, and of course the crucial scene you're talking about is where the astronauts claim that they have their camera right up to the window of a space vehicle and taking footage of Earth. And, Earth looks, pretty round. It looks cloudy and all that. But then the camera backs up and lights come on. And, in fact, the camera was way back and was shooting through a porthole in the space vehicle to create the false impression that what you were seeing was the whole of the Earth, when it was simply a circular portion of the Earth being shot through the porthole. And in fact, one of the other telling signs is that, while the camera, the lens is supposed to be right up to the window, an arm shows up in the footage, which of course reveals that in fact there is considerable space between the window and the camera. It's quite a sensational development, Bart, and you got it purely by accident?
Well, I can't say that, to tell you the truth. But that's what I thought initially. What I thought initially, and then another party informed me that it may not have been an accident.
Well, that's very good, because we have other indications that there may be those who are involved in this or who want to give the game away in ways we'll talk about, including the photographs, because there's this stunning assemblage of photographs that were purportedly taken on the moon, where one student, Jack White, whom I know very well, he's a legendary photo analyst in relation to the assassination of JFK, has discovered by visiting all the NASA websites that they took 5,771 photos in 4,834 minutes. In other words, an exposure every 50 seconds. All of these photographs are perfectly focused. They're absolutely clear. and yet they were taken with cameras that ostensibly were mounted on the outside of these so-called spacesuits by men who had to adjust the aperture and the time interval and so forth using their gloved hands, which he suggests, and I cannot disagree with him, was a physical impossibility. And when you subtract the amount of time that was required for them to perform all of their other activities, the situation becomes even more damning. So that even if you just look at the number of photographs taken, I mean, if you subtract the amount of time for Apollo 11, for example, that they would have had to spend in other activities, you got a photo every 15 seconds, Apollo 12 every 27 seconds, Apollo 14 every 62 seconds, Apollo 15 every 44 seconds, Apollo 16 every 29 seconds, Apollo 17 every 26 seconds. And you just think of the absurdity of that, Bart. I mean, you got to, figure out what you're going to photograph. You got to get it in the right position to take the photograph. You can't be taking photographs at this rate and speed and have any expectation that they're going to come out and have any significance at all.
Well, first of all, Jim, they lied about going to the moon in the first place. So any quote fact that they say about it can't be trusted necessarily.
Oh, of course.
Number one, this number of pictures is I believe a gross exaggeration. I asked NASA to give me every single photograph of every astronaut on the surface of the moon just during Apollo 11. We have Apollo 11. It's the very first time they go to the moon, right? And I just only want pictures on the surface where an astronaut appears in the picture. And there were fewer than 20 pictures. Fewer than 20 pictures of an astronaut on the surface of the moon during Apollo 11. And of still pictures, with a camera, high-resolution camera like you're traveling with or whatever, still pictures of the first man to walk on the moon. Guess how many pictures there are?
One or two.
There's none.
None.
The only picture of Neil Armstrong is the TV images, which may not be him, and one from a 16-millimeter motion picture camera mounted allegedly on the side of the lunar module. But as far as a still picture of Neil Armstrong on the surface of the moon, there's not one. That's a really unusual fact about it. Now, you would think the first man on the moon probably want a picture of it, right?
Sure. And
their excuse is that Neil Armstrong was taking the pictures, and that's why he doesn't appear in any of them. Well, if there's 500-degree temperature difference between light and shadow, and there's radiation, and there's micrometeorites, and you might drop the camera, and open the thing, I might want to have a backup camera, possibly. The fact is the guy did not want any liability, and that's why he very seldom gives any interviews on the subject, because he doesn't want to lie. When you talk about this footage, which, I don't know, do you have video playback on your website or what?
Sure.
Or iPod or whatever it is?
Yeah, I got a Mac.
Yeah, well then, you can play back the video clip, but basically what the footage that we uncovered, if your listeners or if you cue it up, it's like a little blue tennis ball-sized Earth with the blackness around it. Yeah. And that's to prove that they are halfway to the moon 2 days into the flight. They allegedly have a window facing the Earth, and they put the lens of the camera to the window's glass, and they shoot the tiny bit floating in space. In fact, it's back away from the window. They're in Earth orbit. They darken the lights, and it's a circular window that they're shooting with part of the Earth outside of it, etc. What it basically is, and it takes a little while. I mean, I'm in the business, and I had to watch it about 3 or 4 times to understand what it is, because it's a special effects shot, even though we have the unedited version. What it is they're faking a shot of being halfway to the moon. Now, if you're faking a shot of being halfway to the moon, you can't go halfway, right? Because you're faking it, right? So if you're faking being halfway to the moon, it means you can't go halfway. And they all had identical equipment. So if you've got a 2001 Volkswagen Bug and it can't go 500 miles an hour, then my 2001 Bug can't go 500 miles an hour either. So because they had all identical equipment, if the first mission's equipment cannot leave Earth orbit as the tape proves by their faking of leaving Earth orbit, then we know they never went. And the part that you're talking about, the dust, underneath it and things like that, all of these anomalies were were kind of taken care of. The main thing is that once people had in their mind an emotional impression that we really went to the moon, it was really hard to talk their hearts out of it. In fact, I believe it was actually easier to fake the subsequent moon landings after people accepted that the first one was real. I mean, let's say, Jim, I say, hey, let's go to this great restaurant, the best restaurant in town. You get your lobster and filet mignon, and right before you take a bite, this cockroach crawls across your steak.
Yeah.
Now, if I tell you a month later, let's go back to that restaurant, are you interested? Right?
Probably
that
not.
Image is burned.
Probably
that image is, yeah, that image is burned into your mind. It's hard to get out of there. And a positive image can be burned too. You emotionally want to believe that we went to the moon, right? You have no reason to doubt it, to tell you the truth. You really have no reason to doubt it. Who would think that the government would be so audacious to lie through their teeth, even though there was no independent press coverage and only 3 eyewitnesses, right?
Yeah.
And you want to believe it's your team. You want them to win.
Yeah.
So if they win on camera, you know, you're cheering in your heart burns an impression in your own heart. Do you see? And then once you've accepted they go to the moon in your heart, it's really hard to talk yourself out of it. I don't know if O.J. did it or not, but his own attorney alluded that he did after the fact. But if you try to tell his kids that daddy killed mommy, you see, they can't accept it. Their prideful emotional ties to their beloved inhibit them from seeing the truth. See, if we really went to the moon, anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. So why, if you type in Moon Hoax on Google, Moon Hoax, you'll actually see 9 out of 10 websites to defend that we really went to the moon. It's actually the opposite of the Moon Hoax. If you type in Moon Hoax, you don't see about the Moon Hoax. You see about how the Moon Hoax is not real, how we really went. If we really went to the moon, anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. So why are there so many thousands of hours of websites spent to refute a bunch of idiots? You see, O.J. Simpson's lawyers had a reason for everything, too. My film has been taken apart. There's a reason for this, a reason for this, a reason for this. O.J. Simpson's lawyers had a reason why there was his blood in her car, too. But that doesn't make it true. And that's what we're up against. You know, it's pretty stiff competition against the human heart.
Well, I understand completely, Bart. I'm not sure you understood the point I was making about Jack White's research. I mean, this is a guy who's very thorough, very meticulous. He spent his whole life dealing with photographs and composition professionally. He tried to get NASA to tell him how many photos were taken on the surface of the moon, and NASA wouldn't tell him. So he spent 2 days searching documents and text, but the Lunar Surface Journal, one of the sites, lists every photo with its file number. So he undertook an actual count of every photo taken by astronauts during extravehicular activity, EVA, which was the time spent on the surface outside of the LEM, the lunar module. And here's his actual count. He's counting now on Lunar Surface Journal. Apollo 11, 121, Apollo 12, 504, Apollo 14, 374, Apollo 15, 1,021, Apollo 16, 1,765, Apollo 17, 1,986. And when you add that up, you get that number 5,771. Now, this is a preposterous number, Bart, and what Jack has done is to show that the government's own number of photos taken refutes the idea that we actually went to the moon all by itself, because you couldn't possibly take all those photographs in that time. And that's over and apart from all the studies he's done about individual photographs and all the discrepancies of shadows crossing and all this other stuff, which you can find at his website if you just introduce into Google Jack White's Apollo Studies. You'll get a huge index of all of his research there. But because I have you on, Bart, and not Jack, of course, I want to pursue, the issues of greatest interest to you. But I think NASA is trying to be cagey, because now that Jack has exposed the charade just in terms of numbers of photographs, they're obviously going to try to bury it.
Well, I remember going to his site when someone first brought it to my attention years ago, and I remember being very impressed with it. To tell you the truth, especially with the 40th anniversary coming by, it's been quite exhausting, doing all this. I've been working on this for 10 years, doing 2 films. It's really exhausting. And A lot of people advise me just to give it up, whatever. To me, it's a moral issue that it's about right and wrong.
Yeah.
It's not that I think anyone should be prosecuted for it. I don't. I think everyone should be given amnesty. If Kennedy's assassin comes forward, I think he should be given amnesty, because the truth is more important than individual prosecution.
Bart, that's a great point. That's a great point to make, and the right time for us to take our first break. This is Jim Fetzer with my very special guest today, Bart Sibrel, who produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. We'll be right back.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone, and some remain. All these places have their moments. With lovers and friends, I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. But of all these friends and lovers, there is no one compares with you. And these memories lose their meaning when I think of love as something new. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. In my life, I love you more.
Even Bush admits that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. Our own FBI acknowledged it has no hard evidence that ties Osama bin Laden to 9/11. But if Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11, and if Osama had nothing to do with 9/11, then who did it? Who did it? The 9/11 conspiracy provides the answer. Discover the big picture. Learn what we know now. Find out what it means. 11 experts contribute to exposing the truth as the anatomy of an atrocity. Edited by James H. Fetzer. Buy it now if you have the courage to face the truth. Just don't think you're going to like it. The 9/11 conspiracy provides the answer.
Michelle, my belle, these are words that go together well. My Michelle, Michelle, my belle, Sunday mots qui vont très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all I want to say. Until I find a way, I will say the only words I know that you understand. Michelle, ma belle, sont des mots qui vont très bien ensemble, très bien ensemble. I need to, I need to, I need to
Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest today, Bart Sibrel, famous for his film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and for an incident involving one of the Apollo astronauts when he asked Buzz Aldrin if he'd swear on a Bible that he actually went to the moon. That must have been quite an incident, Bart.
Well?
He wasn't very cooperative, I take it.
I'm sorry?
He wasn't very cooperative.
Well, let me just say for the record, that was my fault. The whole incident was my fault. I didn't wake up that day saying, I can't wait to call Buzz a liar, a coward, and a thief. And he didn't wake up that day saying, I can't wait to punch Bart. What had happened was I'd been to Japan a couple of times, and the Japanese are very technologically proficient, and they know we didn't go to the moon. And so they have put a lot of money into writing a book about it and films about it and interviewing me. They flew me over there twice. They had arranged an interview with Buzz Aldrin, if you will, an ambush interview where they paid him $2,000 for 1 hour. So he's making $2,000 an hour to talk about something he didn't do. And they had me there I had my own crew, so I could film it separately. Film his reaction to me breaking in on the interview, which was all planned, to confront him on, whether we went to the moon or not. It was an ambush interview. It was planned that way. Whether or not a guilty party is deserving of an ambush interview, that's up to, you to decide. And the heat got turned up. He just got paid $2,000 for doing something he didn't do. I felt he was a liar. Felt he was a thief for taking that money. I think he was a coward for being afraid to tell the truth. When I said that to him, he punched me in the face. But the way I looked at it is, like I said earlier on, and it may be hard to believe, but I try to be a Christian. It's really hard, in this corrupt world. And a minister of mine said, if you were arguing with your wife and you said something like, oh, that's just the way you did it with your last husband, and she threw a plate at you, whose fault would it be that she threw a plate at you? You see, saying that remark, was crossing the line. Yeah, they should be in control of their own body and whatever, but the fact is, had I not said you're a coward, a liar, and a thief, he wouldn't have punched me. So it's my fault that happened.
Well, I don't think you're asking him to swear that he had been involved in this in a legitimate way was irresponsible at all, but I do think it's entirely possible, given the number of astronauts. I think there must be 11 odd deaths associated with the program, that they have been intimidated by, the NASA is an intelligence agency of the United States. But Bart, I'm sure you appreciate that, but most Americans don't realize that NASA isn't some independent standalone entity, but it's like an extension of the National Security Agency, the CIA, and so forth, and the techniques they're going to use to control their assets are liable to be harsh. And I would not be surprised personally if these guys had been told that if they ever blew the whistle or gave the game away, that their wives and their children could be taken out.
Well, that's pretty advanced thinking, and I happen to agree with you, even though it may be advanced. The fact is, my research of Neil Armstrong's character, he was a very, very outgoing person. He played the piano. He was always the life of the party. At all bars and wherever he hung out, he was the life of the party. And I think he was humble, and I think he was honest. And on January 27th, 1967, the crew that was supposed to be the first crew to go to the moon, you see, that was the Apollo 1 crew. Remember, first on the moon, Apollo 1? And Gus Grissom had the best rapport with the media in the United States, which, of course, is very important to the executive branch, right?
Yes.
Now, the reason why he had a great rapport with the press and the public was because of his Mercury capsule splashing down in the Pacific, I believe, and the impact triggered the explosive bolts on the door, which were for emergency use only, right? And the impact triggered them. So when the thing hit, the water at about at least 60 miles an hour, probably more. It triggers the explosive bolts, and the thing's got to bobble underwater at least 20 feet, if not more. You know, the explosive bolts go off, and the door opens and starts flooding, right? Not the best circumstance to be in, right? In addition to this, the guy had in his pockets, he had about 6 rolls of nickels. You know, from the bank, rolls of nickels, right?
Yeah.
He had 3 in each pocket. And the reason he did this was because he had a son, Scott Grissom, who was in elementary school. And he loved kids. And he wanted to give them souvenirs. He wanted them to each have a nickel that had been in outer space. So he took 6 rolls of nickels, put them in his pocket, to give to his son, to give to all of his school children in 3rd grade as a souvenir for the children. And when the explosive bolts went off on the impact and it filled up with water, and the mission was considered a fiasco, really. It was an embarrassment. You know, they had to trudge him out of the water. It was kind of a failure, really. At the press conference, he admitted that he had these rolls of nickels in his pockets for the children. And when he started sinking to the bottom of the ocean with extra weight in his pockets, you know, he had said, maybe that wasn't such a brilliant idea. And then some reporter asked him, were you afraid? And you know what he said?
Yeah.
He said, of course I was afraid. He admitted the truth.
Yeah.
Told the truth. Just like George Washington, the father of our country, who, when he wrote dispatches to Congress, right? And you've got to give Congress a pep rally during the Vietnam War and civil rights, you could say, the parody of. But instead, he said, you know, we're outnumbered 4-1. Half my officers are incompetent. The other half are drunk. We have no shoes. We have no food, and it's winter. How are you guys doing? You see, he told it the way it was. And America claims to be a Christian nation. Is that true? Right?
Well, actually not. But
well,
I mean,
that's what statistically you go to an encyclopedia, which says the moon landings are real, and you go to an encyclopedia that says what percentage of America is Christian, and it says 90%.
Well, that doesn't mean that the nation, in terms of its government and constitution, is Christian. You know, it's not a theocracy. That's the point.
That's what's claimed. So that's what's claimed. So publicly, officially, 90% of Americans are followers of Jesus, right? Now, Jesus said, the truth will set you free. And we go back to the Bible again about lies and truth, darkness and light, you see. And Gus Grissom told the truth, you see. So because of his popularity because of his humility, he was chosen to be the first man to go to the moon. Well, he was complaining up the chain of command, you see, that they were, in his opinion, 10 years away from going to the moon in 1967, not 2. In fact, I personally have interviewed his son, Scott Grissom, you know, the elementary school guy.
Yes.
Who, you know what he does now for a living?
Scared to ask.
He's a pilot.
Really?
Of 747.
A commercial pilot, an airline pilot.
Well, the most difficult or intricate, you could say, maybe not difficult, the most intricate aircraft on the earth.
Yes.
That's what his son does. I spoke with him for hours. I spoke with his widow, Betty Grissom, for hours. Now, Betty told me that a few weeks before he died in the fire on January 27, 1967, called the Apollo 1 fire, he was kind of a gardener, you know. He had a backyard, he had a lemon tree, a grapefruit tree, an orange tree, an apple tree, a pear tree, all in his backyard in Houston. And he picked a lemon the size of a grapefruit, huge lemon, and he put the coat hanger in the middle at the bottom, and he stuck the grapefruit in the middle of it, and he turned the hook around, and he hung it on the door, the top of the pyramid, the top of the rocket to the moon. He hung it there. And without permission, he had an impromptu press conference. And he invited in the media, and he told them that he thinks the rocket to the moon was a lemon. You see, the astronaut corps around him was, go Gus, but they all stood back several feet in case he was struck by lightning. You see, the first man before Neil Armstrong to walk on the moon was going to be Gus Grissom. And he put a lemon. He put a lemon on the door of the moon rocket to go to the moon. Just a few weeks before he burned alive in it, he called the thing a lemon publicly. Says it's a lemon. In fact, before he burned alive, they were having problems with the radio. It was a wired radio between two buildings, and they couldn't hear each other. You know what he said right before he died? He said, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between two buildings?
Yeah.
And according to the dead man's wife, Betty Grissom, and according to the dead man's son, Scott Grissom, according to their forensic evidence of the spacecraft, which the government has tried 2 times to destroy and disassemble, they know for certain, in their mind, it's not my mind, this is in my opinion. My opinion is that the moon landings are fake. But the Apollo 1 fire, and that's their opinion, but it's their qualified opinion, and I trust their opinion. I mean, it's the dead man's wife and the dead man's son who piloted the 747. Their opinion, that fire is set deliberately.
Yeah.
Okay? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, of course.
Now,
I share that opinion. I mean, it was the capsule was filled with pure oxygen, and a spark somehow was ignited, and they were allowed to burn to death.
Well, let me just say this for the record, or the semi-record. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. An astronaut's gone wild in the press conference, which you can all get at moonmovie.com. It cost $1 million to make these movies. $1 million. I didn't have $1 million. And I feel like I'm kind of like the John Adams of the Founding Father days. And there's a John Hancock out there who wishes to remain anonymous, and you can't blame him for wanting to do that. But he put up $1 million. And let me tell you, this individual who financed my movies, he's a board member of an aerospace company building rockets for NASA today. And he knows from an engineering point of view that the moon equipment couldn't possibly go to the moon in 1969. No way. It couldn't work today. You see. Now, the family of the Apollo 1 fire, they know that that was said deliberately. I know that the moon landings did not happen. Do you think the two events are related? You see? Now, I've read a 500-page report about the Apollo 1 fire. You know how much it cost, the 500-page report? Should get out my calculator here.
How much you mean per page?
Here? Well, it cost $10,000. Let's do $10,000 divided by 500. Oh, that's not too bad.
$2,000
but anyway,
a page.
He spent, the anonymous contributor, we bought the Apollo 1 fire report from a congressional archive. Actually, it's from the estate, now that I think about it. It's from the estate of the Roger White and Chaffee. I think it's from the Chaffee estate. We paid $10,000 from the widow's estate to get. She had a personal copy of the Apollo 1 report. We paid $10,000 for it. Okay, I read about and then I didn't read all of it. 500 pages. I read every single word of every single page for 150 pages, and that was enough for me. You know what? Number one, they found cyanide gas in the capsule. Okay. Number two, when they removed the astronauts' burned bodies, for your listeners, they had a fire, which was the accident, in quotes. Okay, they were buckled in. They had safety belts type of thing. They were buckled in. So when they removed their corpses were buckled in. right? So the corpses are buckled in, and cyanide gas is found among the residue, right? That's what I found out in 150 pages. That's why I didn't bother reading anymore. Now, von Braun, and this is something, if your listeners should, and maybe you've never heard of this, is you need to go to YouTube and look up Apollo Zero, spelled Z-E-R-O. And Apollo Zero is a film by the executive producer that has a lot of really good scientific data in it. And in it, they have an interview with a gentleman from the, I don't know what department, something like the FBI or something. Anyway, they say von Braun was a war criminal. He was a war criminal. And had he not been involved in the moon rockets and had he not lived, 2 years longer, he would have been, probably executed. And you see, they claim that the fire was the cause of their deaths, right? Well, if you smell smoke or you see a flame, what's the very first thing you're going to do? You see, you're going to unbuckle your safety belt, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing you're going to do to get the heck out of there. So the fact that they were buckled in when they were dead means they were dead before the fire. And that's where the cyanide gas come for. And here's the third part. We have a dip on the telemetry data. We have a dip in the electrical power right before the fire. Someone had alligator clamp, some sort of cyanide thing in there, and they triggered it before the fire, you see, and that's why there's a dip in the power. The cyanide gas killed them. Then they ignited the fire. The fire was actually to get rid of the forensic evidence of the cause of the homicide, which was cyanide gas. Because if they used the fire to kill them, one of them may have gotten out. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You see? And so they killed them before the fire, and they used the fire to get rid of the forensic evidence, you see?
Yes.
Now, as you said, threats on your life and family, right, of the future folks, now you have the next crew, the backup crew, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin coming in. And you say to Neil Armstrong, we need you to fake the moon landing. Well, the guy flies experimental aircraft. I personally cannot think of a more dangerous job on the planet than flying an airplane that has never been flown before. That's pretty dangerous, I think. That's what the guy does for a living. He's a test pilot, right? We have footage of him flying the lunar module 6 weeks before the moon landing, and he ejects 1 second plus 1/30th of a second. So he ejects 1 second plus 1/30th of a second before the thing crashes. The guy's really good. He's a really good pilot. And remember, he was the life of the party, right? Well, if you threaten the guy's life, to fake the moon landings, what does the guy do? I mean, he's flying experimental aircraft, threatening his life. It doesn't really mean a whole lot to him, does it? You see? That's why you got to turn the heat up. And that's the only thing I can think of. Exactly what you said, Jim, that he threatened the life of his children. And in fact, in the film Capricorn 1, based on Bill Casing's book, which was based on the interview that I saw, that's what they did. And they had the Apollo 1 fire to back them up. They said, we killed those guys. You want to be next? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I think that's right, Bart. And Capricorn 1 is a completely brilliant expose of how faking a trip like this to the moon, or in that case to Mars, could be done on a stage, in a set, out in the desert, in that instance.
Well, it's funny how life imitates art and vice versa. It's so odd. Have you ever seen the film All That Jazz?
Roy Schneider?
Roy Schneider, that's right. Basically, Bob Fosse, who was the director, hired Roy Schneider to play himself, and it was an autobiography. Well, in the film, the guy has a heart attack outside the hotel across from the Broadway play that he's directing, right? So 10 years later, the director of the movie, who's autobiographical, he has a heart attack outside of the hotel across from the Broadway play he's directing. And in Capricorn 1, we have Elliot Gould, right, which I hate to say is me, and he works for an NBC affiliate, right? He's fired for working on the story, right?
Yeah.
I worked for an NBC affiliate, and I was fired for working on the story.
Really?
So it's so amazingly, ironically poetic. It's bizarre. And here we are.
Yeah.
You know, the fact is that the truth will come out in the future. And the astronaut's reputation, you know, will be decided by people after they're dead unless they come forward now, and then they can contribute to how it's decided.
I'm sure you'll know the details of this, but one of the articles I was reading suggested that at a press conference, I think Neil Armstrong was asked how it felt to step on the moon for the first time, and he rushed away sobbing and in tears and never answered the question. And the interpretation, of course, was that this was a traumatic experience because, of course, the whole thing was a fraud and he couldn't control his emotions. Well,
You know, the great mind is sometimes unreliable. You know, I've been punched by Buzz Aldrin, and someone at Channel 4 near where I work, they said I punched John Glenn. So I heard that story personally attributed to Buzz Aldrin, but in any particular case, 2 of the 3 guys did not give interviews. You know, not only, I mean, I'm really pleased with The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. You know, again, you can watch it at YouTube in 5 parts or go to moonmovie.com. The second film, Astronauts Gone Wild, is nothing that special artistically. However, it is a very good record to get the astronauts' reaction, you know, to being confronted with the fact that they didn't walk on the moon. And it's really, really interesting. You know, people watch that movie and they're either like hooting and hollering or they're like got a knot in their stomach. I mean, if you can imagine me approaching Neil Armstrong with the Bible and $5,000, offering him $1,000 a second to say, I swear to God I walked on the moon, and him shaking like a leaf and refusing to do it.
Yeah.
You know, artistically, there's nothing that special at all about Astronauts Gone Wild, but historically, for the record, it's very interesting. Because it's just down and dirty. There they are. I mean, you talked about the Apollo 10 mission, which also never left Earth orbit. Because in the window shot, if you get the unedited version, which is in monkey business on moonmovie.com, you see that they refer to this is the same way 10 did it. Remember the window shot?
Yeah.
Part of that unedited footage, we have them saying this is the way 10 did it. So any time they claim to have orbited the moon, they did not. Apollo 13, Apollo 10, they did not orbit the moon. They could not leave Earth orbit. Because we have them on tape saying that the fake shot is the same way Apollo 10 did it.
But by the way, you were right. I've just discovered the passage from the piece I was reading, which is entitled Apollo Moon Hoax, Dr. David Grove's Analysis. And the passage was several years after NASA claimed its first moon landing. Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, was asked at a banquet what it felt like to step onto the lunar surface. Aldrin staggered to his feet and left the room crying uncontrollably. It would not be the last time he did this. It strikes me that he's suffering from trying to live out a very big lie, says Renee, one of the experts, critics. Aldrin may also fear for his life, very consistent with what we've been discussing.
Well, Aldrin, I really like the guy a lot. And and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which I really appreciate you watching right before the interview for the second time, because you remember the part where Neil Armstrong said, maybe you could cue it up and you could play it, you know, for your listeners. Play that, you could play talk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Talk is very interesting. We could go into talk, you know?
Yeah.
About what that means. But basically, Neil Armstrong, the tears in his eyes, you know, the last time he spoke publicly, said, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of the truth's protective layers.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
I saw hope in his eyes.
Yeah.
But when I saw it on the 35th anniversary, I mean, I was be quite honest, laying in bed, doing emails and whatever, and I was flipping channels, and there on the 35th anniversary, I see Michael Collins, Neil Armstrong, and Buzz Aldrin speaking for the first time in 10 years with the White House behind them, lying through their teeth about what they did. And Buzz Aldrin was normally the most talkative, but he talked the least. And that glimmer of hope that I saw in Neil Armstrong's eyes
Yes.
was completely gone. He was like a soulless ghost, just like Collins. Collins said, the rocket went somewhere. Well, you think you're going to fake the moon landing without launching a rocket? But when they asked Buzz, hey, I'm glad I'm here via satellite so I don't get punched, he looked down at his hands.
Bart, we're going to take our second break at this point. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest, Bart Sibrel, and we're talking about a funny thing that happened on the way to the moon.
Love me do, oh, love me do. Love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do. Love me do, oh, love me do. Love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do. Oh, love me do. Yeah, love me do. Oh, love me do.
We can now say, with moral certainty and considerable scientific authority, that the death of JFK was committed by a meticulously executed conspiracy which was obscured by an extensive cover-up. Murder in Dealey Plaza, edited by James Fetzer, goes to the heart of the JFK assassination. You'll read new and up-to-date information regarding the Secret Service, the Lincoln limousine, the medical evidence, the cover-up, altering the film, framing the patsy, and the silent historians. Also, 16 smoking guns, each one crushing the government's lone assassin scenario. A world-class chronology of November 22nd, 1963. Chapters by David W. Mantic, Gary Aguilar, Vincent Palomero, Douglas Weldon, Jack White, Ira David Wood III, James H. Fetzer, Doug Horn, and a classic essay by Bertrand Russell. The complete story in the pages of one single book, edited by James H. Fetzer. Read it now. Read it again. You'll use it as a reference. Murder in Dealey Plaza. Available at Amazon.com and major bookstores around the world. It's murder.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where my special guest today, Bart Sibrel, produced, wrote, directed A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. He is convinced that the whole Apollo program and the claims that we went to the moon is a hoax, and he's got a lot of evidence to back it up. Bart, I wanted to ask your opinion about a number of the films the documentaries that are out there. You've mentioned a couple of them. Maybe you could say what you consider to be, the strongest features of them. One of my favorites is Conspiracy Theory. Did we land on the moon?
Well, that's a pretty good film, actually. That was done by Fox. We went to them with A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and they liked it, but they did not want to air it in its entirety because they felt like they would have liability from the astronauts or whatever. My argument was the last thing the astronauts are going to do is sue us, because otherwise, if they sued us, we'd have to go to court. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Prove the moon landing was real or not, in which case we could very likely win. So they're avoiding court like the plague.
Sure.
So they may threaten to sue us, but they would never in a million years sue us. Not in a million years. And the film aired 3 times, by popular demand. Now, even though they didn't air the secret footage, that was one of the shows that didn't air the secret footage, which I found very odd. They never aired the number one evidence. Remember, Geraldo asked me a couple of weeks ago, what's the number one evidence, and I have it on video, and I gave it to everybody, and it still has never been aired. I'm telling you, this number one evidence of them faking being halfway to the moon, the window shot, has never been broadcast ever.
Bart, how long ago did you have that exchange with Geraldo?
That was a couple of weeks ago.
Just a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
Wait, those things can take a while to trickle up and down, the bureaucracy. So that wouldn't necessarily mean it weren't going to happen. I've been very disappointed in Geraldo since he went legit, though. He used to have this wonderful program where he did all the fringe issues, the stuff that was really crucial. You talked about O.J. Simpson. I blew a sabbatical over that trial. I was supposed to write a book, and I got sucked into the trial. I recorded it. I had this monster collection of my O.J. tapes. My wife and daughter would threaten me that if I misbehaved in their opinion that they'd tape over my O.J. tapes. But, he'd get these excellent people on there. I mean, the best attorneys like Alan Dershowitz, for example, to comment on what was going on. It was utterly fascinating.
Well,
but since he's gone legit, Bart, he's lost all that pizzazz. He doesn't do anything interesting anymore.
Well, he might in the future. I would say that in regard to O.J., let me read something here. I've been working on this, my press release here, updating my press release. Let me just read this to you.
Sure.
This is the last paragraph of a 3-page press release. It isn't that I don't believe the ingenuity of human achievement. It is that my opponents don't believe in the depravity of mankind. In a world full of murder, rape, incest, mutilation, and genocide, this falsifying evidence is so hard to believe. The American public, scientists alike, are too afraid to admit that their admired country would do something so blatantly deceitful that it fogs their minds from perceiving reality. Like O.J. Simpson's children, no matter what evidence is presented to point to their beloved's crime, their closed-minded, emotional, prideful ties inhibit them from seeing the facts. They would rather glory in the victorious lie than humbly the distasteful truth.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, did you finish?
Well, I was just saying that the exposing of this fraud is exactly what is needed to reform our government's thinking and morality.
Well, well, I agree.
The crowning achievement of mankind is putting a man on the moon, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that it was a lie, you see, what we have before us, Jim, here is two possibilities, right? Number one is the possibility that the moon landings in 1969, even though the space shuttle has killed 14 people, going 1/100th as far as the moon landings, right?
Yeah.
That they really went to the moon in 1969. The other possibility is that the moon landings were falsified because of pride and greed and homicide and who knows what else. So you have before us two potential historic possibilities. On your left, that the moon landings are real, landing on another planet, planting a flag, yahoo, yay, we did it, what a great thing. On the other side, the right side, is that the moon landings were fake because of pride and fear. Now, out of the two possible events, which is actually more profound, if true? Landing a rocket on another planet, close to us, albeit, but still, quite a bit away. Or the faking of such an event out of pride and fear.
Well, I think it had more to do with greed, Bart. You're talking about billions of dollars involved here. It's very much like what's going on with the National Health Care Program. I mean, getting a public option is going to be overwhelmingly in the interests of the American people. It's going to force the private companies to reform and moderate their rates and adopt more reasonable policies and do away with pre-existing condition clauses and all that. It's going to reinvigorate the economy. It's going to take all this money we've been squandering on health care and divert the expenditures to far more beneficial practices and policies for the American people. It's going to bring things much into balance. It's going to cost businesses less money. But the HMOs and the insurance companies are going to lose their billions of dollars in profits, so they're trying to disrupt everything. They're sending these yellers and screamers to the public meetings to disrupt them. It's one of the most disgraceful exhibitions I have seen in the political arena since the Bush people were down in Florida banging on the doors of those who are trying to count the ballots in an effort to disrupt it all to make sure Bush would get in office. It's really embarrassing.
Well, if you rob a bank and you get away with $1 million, right, you don't get caught, what do you do next time? You go ahead and steal another $1 million, right?
Yeah.
Or $2 million, right?
Yeah.
And then if you get away with that, then you steal $4 million the next time, you see? And the government has gotten away with faking the moon landing. And so it has emboldened them, whoever they are, and it's probably just an elite minority. You know what I mean? I mean, the Nazi Party was elected by only 1/3 of the people, right? And this, whoever it is, the dark forces in the government, it's kind of hard to understand, but it's something going on. They did fake the moon landing. The moon landings were indeed fake. And until that is exposed, they're just going to keep doing it. They're going to keep robbing the bank. You see? That's why it's so important that this particular fraud come out, because this will waken up the people to say, hey, look, this has gotten out of control. We need to take back, make it, as our founding fathers said, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Because it's not that now, not even close.
Well, psychologists have a concept known as cognitive dissonance when persons are exposed to information that threatens their core beliefs. They suppress it, they avoid it, they deny it. It's like a woman who is confronted with evidence that her daughter has been abused by her husband. She can't confront it, she suppresses it, she denies it. And I think in this case, it so affects your confidence in your government as being a paternal entity that wants to benefit you and the other members of your society that it's very threatening to imagine that the government could be perpetrating a hoax like this?
Well, something weird is going on. You know, people just have to realize that there are only 3 eyewitnesses, government employee eyewitnesses, to each moon mission, and a TV picture completely controlled by the federal government. People don't remember this, but when the lunar module was allegedly descending to the lunar surface, they didn't show live pictures. They showed a simulation, which was like an Atari graphic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They only showed live pictures when he was coming down the ladder. During the actual descent, there were no live pictures.
Yeah.
They could have put a video camera right out the door that had the entire 2-3 hour descent and live, going from this to this. You know what I mean? From orbit to down, live, non-stop.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It would have been easy to do. Easy.
Yes.
And very convincing, but very hard to fake back then. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
and people don't remember this. There were so many simulations going on live TV and the very minimum of reality, and that convinced people, and the people's hearts were burned. Like a cockroach that crossed your plate. They were burned.
And of course,
burned with the reality that we went to the moon when in fact it was not true.
And of course, NASA didn't give live feeds to the various television networks, who had to broadcast off of NASA's own feed, which meant that the images being broadcast were that much more blurry and fuzzy, which appears to have been a way to insulate investigations based upon the videos and what they would have shown had they been in higher resolution.
Well, that's true. The networks were confused. They didn't understand why they couldn't take a live feed. They were asked to, basically, they had, projection TV. It's been around a little while. So imagine the projection TV quality of 1969. You project it on a big wall, then you have a TV camera shoot it, then you have another TV camera shoot that off a monitor, and then that's what goes to the air. It's like they were deliberately degrading the quality of the signal. It's my opinion that the still pictures were taken in a higher quality set, and the TV images were taken in a lower quality set so they could do a 360 panorama view. You see in something, a set the size of an oil drum you see at the airport. And when Ron Howard, a couple of years ago, wanted for his IMAX film about the Apollo missions, thanks we went, wanted to transfer all this footage, to 4 to 5 times the quality that had ever before been seen. That's when they lost 1 to 2 tons of videotapes from the hermetically sealed National Archives. You see, watch Ron Howard's film. I don't forget what it's called, Moon or Going to the Moon or whatever. More than 95% of it are reenactments. It's really amazing. Here we have all this alleged footage of us going to the moon, and 95% of his film about going to the moon are reenactments.
Well, Bart, you must have been unsurprised in the extreme when NASA has just revealed that it lost its original Apollo 11 footage.
Well, that was lost because Ron Howard was going to have it transferred to 4 to 5 times quality than ever before since been seen. And they decided that they weren't going to allow it to be projected on IMAX. Now, if we really went to the moon, they would have had high-resolution copies of it done 10 years before Ron asked for them, right? To prove how glorious it was, right?
Yes.
But when he asked for them to be transferred to 70 millimeter to be projected on, who knows how many feet, 30 by 50 feet or something, that's when they disappeared. You're talking about 1 to 2 tons of videotapes disappearing from the hermetically sealed National Archives building in Washington, D.C., where the Declaration of Independence is stored.
And that's a
little odd, don't you think?
Yes, this is supposed to be some of our most historic footage.
Right.
There's an interesting article that was published in Pravda in 2003 that I have archived on a public issues website I maintain at assassinationscience.com in the upper left-hand corner. In the last paragraph of the Pravda article from 2003 observes that as the Northrop Grumman Corporation, the one that developed and constructed the moon robot, told an American magazine, all the negatives and records concerning the event were liquidated. It's rather strange because we know that America treats its achievements and history with great concern, where they say here trepidation, but that's the idea. That all this, the Northrop Corporation destroyed all its records?
Well, that is kind of interesting, actually, Jim. All of the documentation on all of the Apollo equipment, like the lunar module and what kind of batteries it had or whatever, they say it's not classified. It's just not available. So they took all the technical specifications from all the moon rockets and they threw them into the fire. So you couldn't scientifically prove that the lunar module couldn't power air conditioning against 250 degrees heat on the moon's surface for 3 days on car batteries. And so you couldn't technically prove that because they took all of the technical specifications and threw it in the fire. It's not classified. It's not available. Pretty clever, huh?
Yeah, very clever. I mentioned conspiracy theory, did we land on the moon, which I like a lot because it has probably 24 proofs of a scientific character that the whole thing was a charade and was impossible, emphasizing, as you also do, for example, the radiation of the Van Allen belt and the flimsiness of these so-called spacesuits that were supposed to protect the astronauts.
Yeah, it was a very good film.
Another one I like, by the way, that we've mentioned in passing is Moon Movie, which I think is which is available online. You can also access it if you go to assassinationscience.com, which I like especially because of its portrayal of Werner von Braun, whom you feature in your film, leading an expedition down to the Antarctic to collect moon rocks that had been knocked off of the surface of the moon when it was hit by small asteroids and captured by the Earth's gravitational field and then brought down in the vicinity of the Antarctic so that they could actually collect honest-to-God bona fide moon rocks and then produce them as though they were what had been brought back from the moon.
Well, that is kind of odd. I mean, here von Braun is trying to build a rocket to another world 1 year ahead of a 747, just to go 6 miles above the atmosphere. And he has time to take off to go to Antarctica to retrieve the lunar meteorites, which could be used as fake moon rocks going to the moon. Also, he and the director of the space program, the flight director, visited the space film 2001: A Space Odyssey in England before they went to the moon. So here you have the rocket designer and the flight director, the two people most important in faking a moon landing, if they were to fake it, visiting the set of a film about going to the moon.
Well,
months before Apollo 11.
And I want to ask you about that because there's a new article you can Google how Stanley Kubrick faked the Apollo moon landings, talking about how he may have been recruited to perpetrate the hoax because he had his vast experience having just produced in 1968 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that, my producer has raised the question he wanted me to ask you if you're familiar with this theory and that Kubrick could have used a front projection system to fake the Apollo footage.
Well, I don't know what system he used or didn't use, but I can say this. They couldn't go to the moon. And so they needed to hire somebody to falsify the results of it. So they had two choices. They could hire the general of the Pentagon of the media department and get great security but amateur results, or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet and get great immediate results of good photography and worry about security later. And I would say that's the one they had to choose. In Kubrick's film, The Shining, the little red rum boy, there's a scene where he has on a T-shirt, and what does the T-shirt say? In the movie, it says Apollo 11. And then Kubrick's last film, eyes wide shut, he insisted that it open on a particular day. Now, the studio didn't understand. It was supposed to open on a Friday, and he wanted to open on Wednesday. It was, July 16th, and he didn't understand. He insisted that it open on July 16, 1999, and they didn't understand why. They didn't care why. Sure, we'll give it to you. It's the 30th anniversary of the moon landings.
Very
Eyes
nice.
wide shut.
Very nice.
And in Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey, they went to the moon from a space station. And even in children's books from the late 1950s, the only way they went to the moon was from a space station. We have documentation from Bob Braun that says in order to go to the moon from the Earth directly, you'd have to build a rocket taller than the Empire State Building, weighing 10 times the amount of the Queen Mary, making it an economic impossibility. He recanted on his math by 55,000% after Kennedy set the goal to go to the moon. And remember, he had Nazi war crimes hanging over his head, and he had a lot of incentive to play ball.
Those are fascinating comments. Fascinating comments, Bart. You mentioned another film, Astronauts Gone Wild. Could you tell us a little about that one?
Well, yeah, after, it dawned on me for some reason, maybe because I read the Bible or something, why don't we just ask the astronauts to swear in the Bible whether they walked on the moon or not,
Right.
Oh, why not ask them? So that's when we confronted Buzz Aldrin first. And the really interesting part of Astronauts Gone Wild is when I do an interview of him at a bookstore where he's doing some book hawking how he allegedly walked on the moon. And I cue up the footage, the window shot footage, the secret footage that he shot. And he says, and this makes you a real famous person for having discovered this, but an ego you must have to want to propose stuff like this. He's saying I'm right. As far as he knew, the truth about the moon landings being fake broke in that room. And he said that I was right, although he accused me of having wrong motives. You see, that's on camera in Astronauts Gone Wild. We have Alan Bean saying he didn't go through the Van Allen radiation belt. We have Eugene Cernan saying that the landing on the lunar module was loud, while Alan Bean says it was very quiet. Either the engine descending to the moon was loud or quiet, right? One guy says it's loud, another guy says it's quiet. Another guy says he never went through the Van Allen radiation belt, another guy says he does. It's not artistically that great of a film, but it's got some pretty good data in there,
I would say. One of the other oddities is, of course, their conflict over whether or not they could see stars from the surface of the moon. Bart?
Well, yeah. That was one of the early arguments, is why aren't there any stars in any of the pictures? And their answer is a good answer. They said that the exposure was almost always closed to, account for the bright surface of the moon, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But why didn't they take any pictures of the stars by themselves with an exposure setting perfect for them?
Yeah. Well, even in your own film, you have two of them saying they didn't see any stars, but I would think that would be one of the most spectacular aspects of being on the surface of the moon.
Well, an interesting point to this, we didn't point it out in the film because we discovered it later. If you go back to that segment, Jim, and you look at it, you see Michael Collins chimes in and says, I don't remember seeing any.
Right. He actually says we didn't see any. Yeah.
Right. He wasn't there, was he?
That's right. Isn't that interesting? That's damn
That's
great.
right.
I know it. I think you do.
See, they had the same communal experience.
Yeah.
There were all three in that capsule for 8.5 days. So when Michael Collins said, I don't remember seeing any, he's trying to remind them from the debriefing not to discuss the stars, right? Because they can't fake the astrological position of the constellation. So he chimes in and says, I don't remember seeing any, but he wasn't there. And if you get a printed transcript of the press conference, they changed it and they attribute that remark to Collins. And if you go to YouTube and look for Apollo 0, Z-E-R-O, rather than the number, you'll see where they actually changed the transcript to say that Buzz Aldrin said, I don't remember seeing any. You see, Michael Collins misspoke.
You've got it. You've got him right there. You've got him right there on your film. Everyone should see this film. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. My special guest today, Bart Sibrel, talking about it. We'll be right back.
Baby's good to me, you know she's happy as can be, you know she said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine. Baby says she's mine, you know she tells me all the time, you know she said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine. I'm so glad that she's my little girl. She's so glad she's telling the world that her baby buys her things, you know. He buys her diamond rings, you know she said so. She's in love with me and I feel fine. Baby says she's mine, you know she tells me all the time, you know she said so. I'm in love with her and I feel fine. I'm so glad that she's my little girl. She's so glad she's telling the world that her baby buys her things, you know. He buys her diamond rings, you know she said so. She's in love with me and I feel fine. She's in love with me and I feel fine.
Stem cell research, abortion, cloning, evolution, creation science, intelligent design. These are hot button issues today. Religion and science, morality and government, corporations and fascism. If you want to know what's happening to this nation this very day, then you won't want to miss Render Unto Darwin. After 35 years of teaching logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning, Jim Fetzer offers a critique of the Christian rights crusade against science. If you want to understand the issues, if you want to be informed, this is a book you won't want to miss. Render Unto Darwin at Amazon.com and the major bookstores. Render Unto Darwin.
Paperback writer. Dirty yesterday. All my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know, she wouldn't say. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Why she had to go, I don't know, she wouldn't say. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal. We've temporarily lost our guest, Bart Sibrel. I hope I can make contact with him momentarily. But in the meanwhile, I want to talk about this article in Pravda, which makes a number of rather crucial
news, politics, rumors, rants, and debates. It's the worldwide home of free speech radio. RevereRadioNetwork.com. Total free speech, even when it's ugly.
Give Revere Radio the first portion of your income. Say that with me. Give Revere Radio the first portion of your income. Give it first! Not after the deducts, not after the Social Security, the hospitalization, the malnutrition. Not after all these little things on your checklist you say, well, I'm going to give a little what's left. You do, and that's what Revere Radio will give to you. So take out your wallets as we...
Understand
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my missing guest, Bart Sibrel. We got cut off, I'm very sorry to say. Something many of you in the audience may be wondering is why in the world the United States would have faked the moon landing. Well, it was a very awkward situation politically. The Russians had made massive progress in space. They appeared to be far ahead of the United States. Bart, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, how nice to have you back with me. I'm very pleased. I'm just talking about the motivation for faking the moon landings, which I'd like you to address while I have you here. Namely, that the Russians were far ahead in space and that we really needed to show that the Americans could compete rather than face the humiliation of losing the competition to our arch rival.
Well, that's true. Kennedy set the goal to go to the moon by the end of the 1960s. That was his goal in his mind. Let's go before the end of the decade. And that's kind of why I think it's relevant to see that the 747 took a year longer to develop. Even though 2 billion aircraft had been made in history before then, it took a year longer to develop the latest aircraft that had already been tried and tested, in smaller formats than going to another planet for the very first time with a year less research and development. And it really seems illogical. Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. You really think it'd be 50 years before any nation on Earth flew across the Atlantic in an airplane? Technology does not go backwards unless the moon landings are real. You see, if it were so easy to play golf on the moon in the 1960s, then there would be bases there by now. The South Pole, which has 200-mile-per-hour winds and minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, there are more scientists there every year. Mount Everest has more climbers every year. And the moon would have more and more people exploring it if it were so easy to go 40 years ago. And the only nation on Earth that claimed to have gone it can't repeat the event for 50 years? Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, and they can't repeat the event for 50 years? And yet, people are so brainwashed because of their patriotism zeal that the moon landings are real, that they completely ignore that scientific and logical argument.
Well, it seems to me the evidence cumulatively, just some of the basics we've talked about here, the fakery involved that you've exposed, the Van Allen radiation belts, the flimsiness of the spacesuits, the massive number of accidents and malfunctions that took place right up to the time of the Apollo, and then all of these flights take place flawlessly. The fact that the photographic record is a jumble and a mess, that NASA has now lost the records, the most precious film footage, presumably in terms of American achievements in our history, that Northrop has destroyed all of its records. When you put all this together cumulatively, it absolutely smacks of a cover-up. And when you throw in the reluctance, the reticence of the astronauts to talk about their experiences on the moon, Bart, if you and I or I had gone to the moon, you couldn't get us to stop talking about it. And yet these guys are hardly willing to start.
Well, it's true. I hate to equate it with something that's so simplistic as Santa Claus, but it's like, a child would rather believe in Santa Claus than there's not a Santa Claus. It's more exciting of an event. And going to the moon is this Santa Claus achievement, which is really scientifically illogical. And the fact that they destroyed all the evidence supporting how they did it, it's pretty amiss. So it's destroying all the video footage from every TV transmission. So it's 2 to 3 astronauts not getting any interviews. It's kind of like, O.J. Simpson's kids, again, they don't want to accept the guilt of their father because they love their father. And the American public loves the government and loves the zeal of the team that won the race to the moon. And they don't want to accept that they cheated to win. But that's the way that it is. And throughout history, the minority has been proved right. The minority thought the world was flat, or round when it was flat. The majority said it was flat. The minority said it was round. And scientists, the leading scientists of our day killed our father of our country, George Washington, to bleed a virus out of him because they thought that was the right thing to do. They were wrong. You know, and here we are in this era thinking the moon landings are real, and they're not. You know, I don't know what to say. It's a bizarre position that we're in.
Let me mention some of the evidence that's been amassed, and much of which you talk about in your video for your comment. How can the flag be fluttering? I mean, we got no atmosphere on the moon, and there's all this footage of the flag flapping around, you know, and until I watched your film again, I'd forgotten how obvious it was and how compelling.
Well, there's actually a very good clip, even better than the one in my film. If you go to YouTube and search Apollo 0, Z-E-R-O, there's a clip of the flag from color video footage from one of the later missions when an astronaut just passes it. He doesn't touch it. He just goes past it. And his passing it causes it to flutter. Really good. I mean, they're in a TV studio and they have air conditioning because the backpacks had the cooling units removed so they wouldn't fall over, you know, in the Earth's gravity. It got hot. They had a lot of air conditioning in there. Occasionally made the flag flutter. Some people believe it was deliberately left in there as a sign, a message to cry out, like Kubrick's, you know, Eyes Wide Shut, you know, on the 30th anniversary of the moon missions. This is, you know, the world we live in. It's sad. We live in a world of genocide and murder and rape and incest. So what is it to counterfeit evidence? You know, Nobel laureates have had prizes retracted because they counterfeited findings. Cold fusion was allegedly to have happened a couple of years ago, but it couldn't be independently verified. You know, the moon landings have never been independently verified by another nation, never, not one. But they can't be, you know.
We've talked about the blurry, fuzzy footage from the television coverage and how NASA required the networks to film their own broadcast footage, which was made it doubly blurry and indecipherable. But the still photos were extremely precise, perfectly exposed, sharply focused. As one commentator has observed, yet the cameras had no white meters or viewfinders, so the astronauts achieved this feat without being able to see what they were doing. Their film stock, moreover, was unaffected by the intense peaks and powerful cosmic radiation on the moon, conditions that should have made it useless. They managed to adjust their cameras, change film, and swap filters in pressurized suits. It should have been virtually impossible with gloves on their hands.
Well, that's true. One of the greater segments of conspiracy theory, Did We Land on the Moon, from the Fox special, was the manufacturer, the gentleman who actually built the cameras that the astronauts allegedly used on the surface of the moon. And when he was shown in the pictures, he thought that they were shot by electrical lighting. Not sunlight, like they claim, but electrical lighting. And he, very embarrassed, looked down at his hands and said, I can't explain why they look this way. Now, that's the guy who made the camera.
That's the guy who made the camera, yes.
Well, when he says that they look like they're made by electrical lighting and they can't explain why they look this way, you know, you might have an authoritative opinion on the subject, you know. It's a distasteful truth that people do not want to accept, you know, that our country lied through their teeth, you know, but they did. And again, there's no independent press coverage. There's, you know, not like World War II. I mean, you can have chem crews everywhere. It's only a TV picture controlled by the government. And there's 3 eyewitnesses who could have been bribed, blackmailed, or any combination thereof, you know. That's their proof.
Another criticism is that outer space is awash with deadly radiation that emanates from solar flares firing out from the sun. Standard astronauts orbiting Earth in near space, like those who recently fixed the Hubble telescope, are protected by the Earth's own Van Allen belt, but the moon is 240,000 miles distant, way outside the safe band, and during the Apollo flights, astronomical data shows there were no less than 1,485 such flares. A physicist who worked for NASA, John Malden, once said that shielding at least 2 meters thick would be needed. That's more than 2 yards thick would be needed. Yet the walls of the lunar landers, which took the astronauts from the spaceship to the moon surface, were, said NASA, about the thickness of heavy-duty aluminum foil?
Well, something is preventing them from leaving Earth orbit, because the footage that we have is of them faking leaving Earth orbit. So there's some technological reason why they can't leave Earth orbit. Either enough fuel they don't have, or radiation. It's something that's preventing them. It's probably radiation. Micrometeorites hit the surface of the Earth. We're going through a meteorite shower now, and they say you can see 200 per hour, tonight and tomorrow night. 200 you can see per hour. These are about, maybe some to fist-sized meteorites hitting the Earth, they burn up or whatever. So that shower constantly hits the moon because it doesn't have any atmosphere. So you're talking about a particle that's 1/20th the size of an eye of a needle. It's still traveling at 40 to 50,000 miles an hour. And if you're on the surface of the moon, it would go through your spacesuit and skull and decompress your spacecraft and spacesuit and kill you, from the impact in your brain. Von Braun said in his own writing that we have, he said if you landed on the moon, you'd have to go into a cave, because in his estimation, there was a 50% chance of catastrophic failure every 24 hours from micrometeorites. That's why you had to go into a cave. So the fact that they allegedly haphazardly, running around the moon with this shower of these little dust particles traveling at 50,000 miles an hour, which would have penetrated their suits and caused decompression, that's extremely unrealistic.
Here's a stunning statistic. Every Apollo mission before number 11, the first to the moon, was plagued with around 20,000 defects apiece. Yet with the exception of Apollo 13, NASA claims there wasn't one major technical problem on any of their moon missions. Just one effect could have blown the whole thing. The odds against these are so unlikely that God must have been the co-pilot, said one critic.
Well, it is kind of odd. The fact that when the 747, which took a year longer to develop, when it rolled out of its manufacturing hangar, it couldn't get off the ground. It was a glider. 747 was a glider. They finished the fuselage before the engine. They'd gone through over 160 engines that failed or exploded or whatever, and they couldn't lift it off the ground. Left an aircraft going 7 miles above the Earth, not 250,000 miles away. You see, the space shuttle only goes about 200 miles above the Earth. So if you had a globe of the Earth, it'd be about a half an inch above the globe. The moon is about 30 globes away. If you line up 30 globes, you see 30 globes away or half an inch above one globe. So they're claiming they went 100,000% farther than the space shuttle ever went, with 4 decades older technology, and never killed anyone, even though the space shuttle was killed 14 people just orbiting 200 miles above the Earth. You see, the longer the moon landings go on before they're repeated, the more preposterous they seem.
Ralph Rene, Bart, claims the only real thing about the Apollo missions were their liftoffs. The astronauts simply have to be on board, he says, in case the rocket exploded. It was the easiest way to ensure NASA wasn't left with 3 astronauts who ought to be dead, adding that they came down a day or so later out of the public eye and into the safe hands of NASA officials who whisked them off to prepare them for the big day a week later.
Well, they were on the rocket, I believe, so that they could go up in front of the witnesses, and they could get real zero-gravity footage, the tuna sandwich floating by in zero gravity, which they could do from Earth orbit. And from Earth orbit, they could say they're halfway to the moon, 3/4 to the moon, whatever, you wouldn't know. And then they could splash down in front of witnesses. The fact is they just never left Earth orbit. And this new footage we uncovered, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which is available on YouTube. Go to part 5 and you'll see this footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. It means they could not leave Earth orbit. And only 3 countries on the entire Earth have ever claimed to have even achieved Earth orbit: China, the Soviets, and America. And the only country that has claimed to have left Earth orbit did that in 1969. It just doesn't make sense. The nation emotionally wants to believe we went to the moon, and it certainly is a pleasant thought. And I really wish we had gone, because we'd be in a better world, you know. But the fact is, you know, we didn't go. And the minority is crying out as usual, saying, hey, look, you know, here's the truth, and we'll see what history has to say about whether we're right or not.
Here's a great report, Bart. A NASA public affairs official named Julian Scheer once delighted 200 guests at a private party with footage of astronauts apparently on a landscape. It had been made on a mission film set and was identical to what NASA claimed was the real lunar landscape. Quote, the purpose of this film, Scheer told the enthralled group, is to indicate that you really can fake things on the ground, almost to the point of deception. He then invited his audience to come to their own conclusion about whether or not man actually did walk on the moon.
Well, we're going to have to talk about that in the future. That's the first I've heard of that one. But it sounds pretty good and pretty interesting and potentially true.
I think he was also taking his life in his own hands by doing it.
Well, you know, the way I look at it is if they could go to the moon, that would have a certain significance historically to mankind. But if they couldn't go, and they lied about it, and they murdered people, you see, that's more profound of an event than if they're actually gone. So what we have before us, Jim, is one of the greatest events in human history. Isn't going to the moon. It's the faking of the moon landing out of pride and fear. There's this great event in humanity's history, the faking of the moon landing. And this truth is being hoarded by a minority of people who think they're better than the rest of us. And we cannot go on. We cannot learn from our mistake, you see, until this is learned. See, so one of the greatest events in human history is actually the faking of the moon landing. And because it's a secret, this great, profound event cannot be learned by the rest of humanity. See, that's the tragedy.
Isn't that scary, Bart, that one of the greatest events in human history is the faking of a trip to the moon? The faking of it.
That's right, it is. Yeah, very profound. It's profound because it has to do with lying, deceit, and fear. Fearing the other nations, and fear of telling the truth, and fear of being honest. You know, it's amazingly profound. The fact that the moon landings are fake is more profound than if they had actually gone. And when you see the footage and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which you can see on, you know, moonmovie.com or YouTube, you see that it's true. They really did fake the moon landing. And so you have this great, profound event in human history, the faking of the moon landing out of fear and pride. And a handful of people are hoarding this truth. And they need to, you know, we need to share the truth. We need to share the information that we made this mistake, that we did this wrong, that we lied, provide amnesty for all the astronauts, all those involved, no prosecution whatsoever. Just to forgive them and be forgiven ourselves and move on.
Bart, you're a brave man. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I think you've done the nation a service by producing A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate having you here as my guest on The Real Deal today.
No problem.
We may have to do it again, Bart. I'll tell you, this has been sensational. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking you all for listening with my special guest, Bart Sibrel. Check it out. A funny thing indeed happened on the way to the moon.
Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know, she wouldn't say. I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Yesterday.